Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today we're in the expanded format looking at one of the most successful decks from the City Championships that we've been seeing in the expanded format. So this is going to be Vespiquen Flareon, an interesting take on the deck, but pretty standard overall if you look at the breakdown. So we have a split of 29 Pokemon, that's the count that we've gone for. It pretty much gives us enough damage output to take on pretty much everything, EX or otherwise, and also we have a few different types that we can be in this deck to try and hit for weakness as well. So let's jump into the deck. First of all, we have the full count of 4 Combee and 4 Vespiquen. This is of course one of our main attackers. We have 2. They share the same attack, just with different names. So Be Revenge does 20 plus 10 more for each Pokemon in your discard pile. This is the identical output of Flareon that we'll see momentarily as well for the same attack cost. So Vespiquen, why do we like this card? Well, Be Revenge is very easy to get set up thanks to Ultra Balls and Battle Compressors that we play in the deck. And we also run quite a speedy engine using a lot of Shamans and a relatively low supporter count. So we can get many Pokemon in our discard pile very early on and start hitting for big numbers with Be Revenge. Bear in mind, Vespiquen is a grass type, so we will be hitting for weakness against stuff like Keldeo EX and Blastoise. Obviously, a very powerful combination in Expanded right now. And also, we can hit for weakness against Seismitoad. And that really helps balance out the issues against Toad, because we can't use our trainers for a big portion of the game. And usually, they're very crucial for us getting our damage output going. But because Vespiquen hits for weakness on Toad, it sort of balances out. We normally have a decent enough output to threaten Seismitoad to the point where they have to use alternate attackers or something else like that. So really nice to have this grass typing in the deck. Just a double colorless energy cost. Really easy to get this guy going each turn. Also we have a free retreat cost, so very helpful as well. We're not going to be stalled by things like Seismitoad Garbodor or Sableye Garb because we have a nice free retreat there. So a lot of good things about this card. Very easy to retreat, easy to set up. Just a stage 1 as well, so it's pretty fast. We also have this nice utility, Intelligence Gathering. Does 10 damage and allows you to draw back up to 6. There's a lot of insta-play cards in this deck, so you can often lower your hand size down to a point where if you have the opportunity to use Intelligence Gathering, it can really help you set back up your board state. Obviously the damage isn't too helpful, but at least you get a hand to play with, so it can also get you out of sticky situations. So, next up, our other main attacker is going to be Flareon. Slightly higher HP with 100, which is pretty nice for a stage 1. And this time we have Fire typing. And Fire typing isn't too huge right now. Mega Sceptile is more in the standard format, but there are still some regular Sceptile decks in the expanded format because, of course, they have Virbank City Gym at their disposal. So we can use Vengeance to hit for weakness in that sort of department. But in general, we just have an extra attacker to help us chain attackers each turn, basically. And one of the biggest factors of being a fire type is actually so that we can combine this with Blacksmith. So with 4 VS Seeker and 1 Blacksmith in this deck, we have plenty of opportunities to set up a Flareon in a single turn via, VS Seeker or manually using Blacksmith to power up this Vengeance attack to basically get the damage out of nowhere. And usually we're going to be getting one-shots each turn with this deck. So Flareon, absolutely fantastic that we can Blacksmith. It really releases the pressure off of double colorless energy. And it also means that against energy denial decks like Sableye Garbodor, like Toad Garb as well, or Toad Tina, we have an out. Definitely against Giratina, it's important to have Blacksmith because, of course, we won't be able to attach double colorless energy. So using Blacksmith is an out to getting around that as well. So Flareon serves a lot of purposes, not least having the same amount of output as Vespiquen, but it seems to be the more versatile of the two. Now, I've gone for a 2-2 split of the evolutions. This EV is kind of nice. The energy evolution allows us to get around stuff like Archeops, which is pretty important. If we attach the basic energy to EV, we do play only fire energy as basic, so we can find ourselves Flareons to attack with. It normally requires us to also use Blacksmith in the same turn, which is pretty awkward, but at least we can sometimes get an attack off against Archeops. It's good to note as well that Vespiquen is actually a grass type, so hits for weakness on Archeops, so there's always the option to Lysander it if we're able to develop at least one evolution Pokemon. But Eevee gives us that extra opportunity to evolve out of, or to break the Archeops lock. We are also playing a Wobbuffet in here, so it's not entirely crucial, which is why we're playing a 2-2 split, just because that HP is, not as much as 60. So we're also playing 2 of this Eevee. We are playing 2 different evolutions, so Signs of Evolution is a pretty decent attack at times. It can even be used to fuel our output for Vengeances. If we're holding onto a Sycamore or an Ultra Ball, we can use Signs of Evolution to grab all these Pokemon out of the deck so that we can dump them for more damage. So this is also has a nice attack, and slightly more HP can help us out because there are a few Crobat based decks floating around at the moment in Expanded due to these sorts of decks, to be fair. So it's good to have a couple of the higher end of HP. The only other evolution we're playing is the Jolteon. It's a stage 1 that turns our other stage 1s into lightning types. This is basically to help us out against Yveltal. Oftentimes it's quite a big commitment to throw that many Pokemon in the discard pile against something like a Yveltal player. So using Jolteon really allows us to double up on our damage and allows us to have plenty of attackers throughout the game, because that is a bit of a war of attrition. It's a very 50-50-ish matchup. But once we're able to get around Archeops, even if they play it, Jolteon is often a nice one to set up. And of course, in those matchups where Jolteon is less important, we can just dump him to improve our Vengeance and Be-Revenge output. So very nice to have a one-of in here. Gives us good outs in general. So let's see some of these other cards that we've been filling up our deck with. One of them is going to be Wobbuffet. This is, of course, going to be helpful against Archeops. So we throw Wobbuffet in the active, try and evolve up as many Pokemon as possible so that we have enough Pokemon to attack with. Even if it means we can just get 1 or 2 Vespiquen or Flareon down, it gives us that option to use the Lysander and kill it and then move on from there. Because we are mainly non-EX in this deck, we can afford to Lysander kill Archeops. Even if they are playing a 7-prize game, we're going to be all non-EX as well, so we should be able to rocket ahead even with wasting a turn using Wobbuffet. So good to have this in here. Again, when it's not so important, we can dump it with Compressor. It's also important to note that against Blastoise Keldeo, starting with this guy is pretty awesome. So as long as you know your opponent, you can go into the Wobbuffet if you wish. It's kind of painful for us having Wobbuffet if we are starting with him, because we are fairly reliant on Shaymin for our draw power. So I think 1 is the right count for this guy. Couple other one-offs. We're playing 1 Jirachi. This Stardust is pretty handy for discarding special energy. It can help out against Night March because it can be sometimes a race, and using a Stardust during a game, because we are once again mainly non-EX, we're going to try and hold off from playing our Shaymins in that matchup. If we can use a Stardust, force our opponent into having another out, maybe force them into their Mew EX, which can help us win the prize trade. It could also force them to get something like Milotic developed, and of course we can try and prevent that with Lysanders and such. So Jirachi's a nice tech against Night March. It's also a pretty handy tech against Seismitoad Giratina. It's a matchup that isn't too frustrating for us, but oftentimes we need to wait for the perfect opportunity to get a Flareon Blacksmith going to actually deal with a Giratina, and in the meantime it's very easy to set up a Jirachi with a single energy to start denying Giratina of its energy, so that's pretty awesome overall. A couple other one-offs. We are playing Audino. Once again, this is helpful for Seismitoad Giratina. Additionally, it's helpful for just regular Toad decks or even just Yveltal decks. Getting around special conditions is pretty nice. Those are the main decks that play it. So Busybody, allowing us to discard it from hand to do a heal of 10 and remove a single special condition so that we are not stuck sleeping and don't waste a turn of attacking. It's pretty handy in here. Just based on the odds of you staying asleep, it's that 25% chance with Hypnotoxic Laser. If they hit heads and then you flip tails going back into your turn. So there's no need to play more than 1 Audino in my opinion. But it can help us out in a lot of situations when we are staying asleep. We can buy ourselves a turn once again to attacks, which is pretty awesome. Next up, we're playing 1 Kecleon. This is just a preference in my opinion. I like having this in here. It's quite nice in mirror matches, it turns out, because it can sometimes mean that you, once again, don't need to spend a double colourless energy. You can attach just that single fire and swing into a Vespiquen or a Flareon and steal their Vengeance or Be-Revenge, and you get a knockout. So once again, you're sparing yourself double colourless energies, which can be very, very helpful. Also against stuff like Zoroarks, you can imitate and steal their Mind Jack attack, which is often going to be helpful for you. There's a whole bunch of different attackers out there right now, even stuff like Evil Ball and Y-Cyclone. They can actually end up being very helpful attacks for you, so Kecleon is awesome there. It can actually also really help out against Sableye Garbodor. It's a matchup that is already quite handy for us, because we have those 4 VS Seekers, the Blacksmith. We can normally recycle enough to take the prizes in that game, but Kecleon also allows us to actually steal Junk Hunt and get back VS Seekers or Blacksmith itself, so that can also be very handy, and it's a great one-off to have in here for so much utility potentially throughout the game. The only other one-offs we're playing is a 1-1 line of Banette. Banette is a pretty interesting inclusion. It has the Tool Concealment ability, which is the only reason why we play this card. It can really help out in a handful of matchups. Against any Mega Pokemon, we're pretty much just going to win the prize trade there and then as soon as we develop Banette, because they have to waste turns. Their Spirit Links are obviously shut off, so they have to use something like Hex Maniac before they Spirit Link and evolve, so that's pretty awesome for us. Also, against Donphan or other fighting-based decks, stuff like Fighting Bats that are using Focus Sash, we get around that, which is pretty handy. And again, it's a nice thing to have in the mirror match, because Life Dew is often an important factor. Shutting that off really gives us the edge there. Trying to get the use out of our own one first, of course, and then throw the Banette down to deny our opponent that sort of play. It's pretty awesome. And once again, I'll mention Sableye Garbodor. They like to use Life Dew as well. Banette shutting that off. Obviously, they do play Garbodor though, so it's kind of, a lot of the time you won't get it out in that sort of matchup, just because it's a bench sitter that can be Lysandered up. But it's something to be aware of, maybe finishing off a game, or you've Lysandered and killed their Garbodor, or something of that sort. Whilst you've played around the Life Dew, sometimes you have the opportunity to drop Banette and finish a game maybe a little bit faster than your opponent anticipated, so that's pretty awesome. The only other high counts of Pokemon we're playing is 3 Unknown. Did have 4 in here. I cut 1 for the Kecleon just because I like the utility of the card. But Unknown is still really nice. You get to just insta-play it. Great against stuff like Seismitoad and Garbodor, Seismitoad decks just in general, because obviously the main way we get rid of Pokemon is via trainers. Unknown does it on its own, and also gets you into new cards, which is really nice. It's a great cycle card, really, and just improves our output, which is fantastic. And of course we have 3 Shaymin EX as well. We have a couple of cards in here to pick up Shaymins or get rid of Shaymins so that they're not just targets on our bench, which is a real reason why I like to have the high count of 3 in here. We get the use of the setup, and then we can use stuff like Parallel City or AZ to pick them back up, or in Parallel City's case, we get to discard the Shaymins, so we get the full benefit and no drawbacks of this guy, so pretty awesome there. We have to be aware as well, we are playing DCE, and whenever you play DCE, you have to be aware that Sky Return is a very handy attack in a lot of situations, especially in a deck like this where you want to allow your opponent to put a lot of Pokemon in the discard pile. Sometimes you can throw up Sacrificial Lambs after using a Sky Return, something like a Kecleon or something less helpful at the time. Sky Return into one of those things and get that damage on board. Sometimes you can kill stuff like Joltix, and you also remove the Shaymin from your deck, from your field, and therefore getting rid of that 2 prize target that it always has on its head. So pretty handy to have that in there as well. So that rounds out the 29 Pokemon. Plenty of options in this deck. You can see we play lots of one-offs for certain situations, and basically when the situation is not applicable for that matchup, we're going to dump it with these sorts of cards. We are playing for Battle Compressor. It's amazing for getting that output, of course. Additionally, it's going to help us get our different supporters in the discard pile to combo with VS Seeker. It's also why we max out this card. We have a bunch of different supporters in this deck, and VS Seeker getting the right ones at the right time is pretty handy. Our trainer line is really simple. Next up, we're maxing out the Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball's our main out into Shaymin, which is our main out into more cards. So we want to maximize Ultra Ball as well. Nothing too tricky about our trainer line. Just 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Compressor, 1 Town Map, and also that Life Dew tool as well. So maxing out the important cards and going as thin as possible for all the rest. That's pretty much the motto of this deck. Very, very consistent thanks to these 4 Ultra Balls. Again, it's a means of getting rid of Pokemon as well, so pretty handy there. So here's the Town Map. Just based on the number of one-offs I have, I think Town Map is warranted, to be honest, because we can easily take prizes, And there's some important cards in here like Life Dew, DCE. Obviously, Blacksmith is often important. Lysander, sometimes these one-of cards in terms of Pokemon are important. It's really nice to have access to them at the right times, and Town Map allows us to do that. So it's a very nice inclusion, I think, in the deck. It's a bit of a preference card. This could be another supporter, maybe a second Lysander. That would be the first thing I would probably want to look for, maybe the second Blacksmith. But when you start thinking about that, there's plenty of different one-ofs that you would like to become two-ofs. So I feel Town Map, in a way, fills that void for us without having a headache of which one you want to up to 2, really. Because a lot of these one-ofs are pretty crucial to the deck, but you don't have the space for more of them just because of the nature of the build. 29 Pokemon really does take its toll on the sort of deck slots and decisions that we have to make. So let's look at some of these one-off supporters. AZ is in here. It allows us to pick up Shaman again to get more usage for draw cards, or it also takes him off the board so that we don't have 2 prizes on our bench. I say this a lot just because this deck wins just by prize race alone, basically. We're going to force our opponent to take 6 physical prizes, while each turn we're threatening at least 2 shots, and then once we get into the late game, definitely we will be one-shotting with Vengeance and Be Revenged. So very fast deck, and we're going to try and win on prize race alone. AZ helps us do that. Also, when we're going to be stalled upon with stuff like Seismitoad, whenever we stay asleep with lasers, we just want to use AZ to pick up our dude. And with the VS Seeker combo, we have options to use that whenever we can, so that's pretty nice. Next up we have Blacksmith. It's the main out against Giratina, of course, reattaching these fires to Flareon. It's also very important against the Sableye players as well, trying to deny our energy. And just in general, normally 4DC won't finish out an entire game if we're up against non-EX decks, so Blacksmith becomes a very important card to combo with Flareon. Lysander as well, clearly very important. Prize racing, of course, against other non-EX decks like the Mirror, like Night March. We want to pick off things like Shaman to race ahead in the prize trade. Oftentimes in the early game as well, if you can kill a Shaman while you don't have too many Pokemon in your discard pile, that can really help us race ahead, because then your opponent takes out your active Pokemon, which is 2 more, to fuel your attack for the next turn. So that can really help out as well. Lysander really important in here. I would love to find space for a second. Potentially that Town Map, potentially the Kecleon. I think that might be something that's kind of a luxury in this deck, but overall I'm happy at 1 just because I know that I can see Town Map quite early in the deck, quite early on, because of the amount of draw power we have in this deck. Next up we do have 1N. It's the only real shuffle draw that we have available. It's nice to disrupt the opponent. Again, when we're in such a prize race, you don't want to use N too much on yourself. But when you're in those situations where you've had maybe a slower start, or if you know your opponent has a ridiculous hand, oftentimes if you're up against Gallade players, you want to reset not only their hand, but also the top deck that they would have received, so that you have a chance in that game. So N, pretty important there for that sort of disruption factor. The final one of is Teammates. Teammates is often a card that we're going to look for. That and Comp Search are the only things that can find double colourless, other than Milotic, I guess you could technically say. So Teammates for DC alone is, that's important enough for us to want to play it. It can also get us into Town Map. It's often a card that I pick, which is quite surprising really, but it makes sense. If you know something important is prized, you can Teammates for Town Map and DCE, and then you can pick up that supporter or VS Seeker that you needed for the following turn, and Town Map allows us to do that exactly. So it's a pretty nice combo with the Town Map, it turns out. So Teammates is really nice for that play alone. In general, it's so that we can keep streaming attackers. It's nice for getting out our A-Spec, which is Life Dew as well, which I'll get onto in a minute. Finally, let's just talk about for Juniper, just highlighting the fact that it is, of course, expanded. Juniper will indicate that. I'll try and make a point of that each time so that you guys know. As soon as you glance at the deck, you'll see either Sycamore or Juniper to help you out. So yeah, maxing this guy out. Still our strongest draw card in terms of supporter, and it also helps dump this plethora of Pokemon that we have available, so very, very nice there. So these one-ofs, we are playing Parallel City. You're rarely ever going to limit your own output because it hurts Flareon and Vespiquen, our 2 main attackers. All the time you're going to be limiting your own bench. I think the only times I've wanted to limit my opponent is if they're playing bat-based decks. Limiting them to the amount of bat drops they can do can sometimes help us out. But overall, you're limiting your own bench because it's not too important for us, really. And oftentimes those extra 2 slots on our bench is going to be something like a Shaman or one of these other sitters that aren't going to be too helpful in the matchup, that maybe we've started with something not so important. Maybe we started with a Jirachi in a less important matchup like Keldeo Stoice. You can just retreat that and get the Parallel City going. Obviously, it's replacing your opponent's stadium as well, unless they're playing the same stadium. So that's going to be helpful to us as well. Limiting the output as well of stuff like Zoroark is quite important, so putting our bench size down to 3 is nice. And don't forget, of course, once we put Parallel into play, it's another means of discarding our Pokemon. So again, against stuff like Toad Garb or Toad Tina, if they're using that Quaking Punch and they're looking for Lysander targets, it's nice to Parallel City drop yourself so that you have another means of getting Pokemon at the discard when we can't use Ultra Ball or Compressor. So pretty nice overall there. So Life Dew is the A-spec of choice. I've said so many times that it's all about the prize race, and this is a way that we win it as well. Not only are they taking 6 prizes, now the aim is so that your opponent has to take 7. So they have to have some sort of ridiculous prize denial factors in their own deck, or they somehow need to be faster than us. And at the moment, the track record of Flareon Vespiquen has been proving that not many decks have the ability to do this. So overall, Life Dew, very, very nice. Finally, for energy, super simple. For DCE, it's our main means of attacking. Try and limit them to Vespiquen when you can, because it's really nice to get the Blacksmiths going on Flareon, and it just gives you that more late game advantage. So oftentimes you want the DCEs on Vespiquen. Obviously there are times when it has to be on Flareon, so it's something to be aware of. It has the link up with Shaman. It also has the link up with Ordino, which I don't think I mentioned. Not too notable though, other than killing something like a Joltik. It can actually break the lock for Toad as well, but very niche purposes, especially because they play Keldeo Float anyway, so don't take too much notice of that attack. But yeah, there's plenty of things that work off DCE. And of course the 3 fire. It's the Blacksmith combo. It's so that we can evolve even around Archeops. So many purposes. Just in general, having more energy for DCE isn't really enough unless we were playing something like Milotic, which I've gone against in this deck, just for space issues more than anything else. So yeah, that is the list. It's pretty standard, really. Not too many things that I've seen too differently, other than the Kecleon maybe. Some people are playing, some people aren't. Town Map is a preference choice for players in general, and the supporter line seems fairly standard. Some play AZ, some don't. For me, I just like having the option of the cards, so there we are. Let's get into a few battles with this very, very powerful deck. So, we found a game against Grim. And we are going to be flipping some coins here. Go for heads. And we get to go first, which is pretty nice. I'm rocking the old Vaporeon sleeves as he uses Mewtwo's. I think that's going to be pretty relevant. We'll be putting Ordino in the active. Not too big of a deal. Our opponent has mulliganed, showing off some grass energy. So it could be a Sceptile deck. One of the few decks that play grass energy that I can think of right now, in Expanded at least. And we'll be able to draw a mulligan card here, which is nice, because our hand could do with a decent supporter. But I'm going to hold Kecleon to throw it in the discard pile. So we are indeed up against Sceptile. Very easy for Flareon to get knockouts on this, so we should have a pretty good matchup here. Kecleon's not going to be too helpful because the attacks we would steal are relevant to poisoning, which we can't do in this deck. So first of all, we're going to use a Battle Compressor. I'm going to throw a Juniper in there early because we don't have the most playable of supporter cards right now, only teammates in hand. And we're going to start dumping some Pokemon here that are less useful to us. I think Banette's not going to be too helpful. It's also important that we actually have Vespiquen. And Vespiquen can actually, if our opponent's playing the Ariados instead of the lasers, we might actually be able to survive hits from Sceptiles, which would be hilarious. So let's dump the Banettes here. Could have been a misplay if he is playing the Mega Evolution Pokemon, but normally I think it's safe to assume that they won't be playing that. So let's use the Ultra Ball here. It's safe to assume it full expanded, by the way. In Standard, the only way to play it is the Mega Evolution, of course. We will be using Ultra Ball for Shaymin. So that we can get an extra card, I will be attaching the double colourless to Combee. I think it's relatively safe on the first turn. And Sceptile decks don't normally play much Energy Denial. And we draw into some more Pokemon, which is nice. I think I'm going to Ultra Ball away the teammates and the Vespi to go for another Shaymin here to try and get into more cards. The reason why I kept one more Pokemon is because Flareon is still super important in this matchup. You want to keep as many as possible. And the reason why I'm keeping Parallel is because when you start benching these Shaymins, you want to actually discard them with Parallel later on in the turns. So we actually hit Ultra Ball and Juniper, so we can keep on really digging through our deck here. And it's going to be very nice. Here we can get rid of some more less important Pokemon. I feel like most Sceptile aren't going to be using Special Energy. So Jirachi isn't important. Most don't play anything like Archeops or too many important abilities. So we can happily discard those. I'm going to start counting my evolutions now. And our Vespiquen count as well. I think I'm going to be getting rid of a Combee here. I could also start getting rid of Fire Energy. But the amount of Pokemon I'll be getting rid of via this Juniper leads me to think it's best to go for something else here. So we're going to use that Ultra Ball. And I just want to grab an Eevee, I believe. I think not too important which Eevee to go for. So we will do that. Put down an Eevee. Put down the Parallel. The Parallel is actually going to work wonders for us. We get to get rid of one Shaymin, and also we are limiting the output of Sceptile by 20 damage, so that's pretty handy as well. We can use this Juniper now, draw in some more cards, and we have a pretty awesome hand as well. At the moment, wow, this is all updated. I've not seen this before. We have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Pokemon in a discard pile, so that's pretty nice. I think I'm going to hold Compressor for now, based on what attacker we'll be using next turn. So let's hand it over to our opponent. Just because we're non-EXs, we can probably race this deck in general. Our opponent goes for a Hooper turn 1. Goes for a Sceptile and a Shaymin. Of course, that Parallel City is going to be relevant here. He couldn't go for that third Pokemon. Oh, wow. He does put down Virizion, so maybe he's got a Stadium to replace. Or maybe he's not looking to use Shaymin. How's it? Oh, of course. Sorry, I've being a complete fool. I put Parallel on myself. So that Shaymin is fine to be put on the bench. So we do see a Hypnotoxic Laser onto Ordino. Does get a Tails. And then we see a Juniper here. We do see a Spinarak come down, and there is the Verbank City Gym. So Sleep Poison with that Muscle Band. We'll be doing 60 at the end of the turn thanks to Poison. And he gets Tails on the Sleep Flip there, which is nice. Ironically, Ordino would be a perfect thing to grab here. But we can't do that. So we will... Instead, because we can't really do much this turn, I feel like I just want to evolve up our Pokemon. And thanks to actually top decking this Eevee, that might be the card that I just want to attach to here and get a Flareon out of the deck. I could also just hold it. We have already got rid of one Flareon. So it might be best to just attach the Fire Energy and not even go for the Energy Evolution. I don't feel like Compress is going to be too relevant to us. I won't be attacking this turn because Vespiquen's not getting the knockout, so there's no point in me just retreating, wasting double colourless, and then wasting effectively a second DCE. So I think it's best here just to sort of spread our dudes around. I'm going to attach and not go for the search. And we'll just be passing here. GC is such a valuable asset to us that I feel like we had to do that. It's kind of a shame that it dies going back into our opponent's turn here, but Because it's an all EX deck, I could even go for Shaman here. Very, very tempted. It forces at least Ariados or a laser. Because we've started to commit so much to all of our dudes now, I don't really want to go into anything but the Shaman, so let's go for that. So far we're in a bit of an awkward spot, but this play at least forces more energy to the Sceptile, and this deck doesn't have much... Oh wow, he doesn't even do that. So, okay. Our opponent's going for the slightly slower option here, unless he has some sort of acceleration, which I'm not catching on to here. We're going to see a VS Seeker for a Juniper. So our opponent being kind of playing for more of a longer game here, attaching to the bench Sceptile, but also it means he's not getting 2 prizes this turn, so Sleep Poison going to be increasing that output. Does get heads. So we are asleep as of now, we flip, and we are still asleep. So again, bit of an awkward spot for us here. We do get VS Seeker, so we could get an AZ this turn and actually get a knockout, which is pretty awesome. So that was a pretty big pickup for us. Let's go for that compressor. As long as AZ is in the deck, we should be fine to go for this here. We do have AZ, which is awesome. And I think I want to start getting rid of 1 fire energy. Because we've already put 1 into play, I think we only need 1. And I might want to throw N out of there as well at this point. All the Pokemon seem relatively important. We have a 1-1 Flareon line still in here. So I think Combee might be okay to go. That seems fine to me. So what we're going to do is VS Seeker for AZ. And our opponent was very wise to only attach the energy to the active. Although like he could have gone ahead in the sort of race, which also seems appealing. It means that he has a follow-up to this sort of play that we've come up with here. So we can attach DCE to Flareon. We have another one in the backup. I don't think I even need to play Shaman. And if we don't need to play it, like what really do I need here? We have all the attackers. Not much I need to dig for. So the only thing that sort of punishes us is something like Hex Maniac. But even then, we have the Juniper anyway in hand, so it's not too big of an issue for us. So we are now ahead on prizes, and we're able to pull a Vespi from those prizes, which is nice. We see an attachment to the Sceptile. They need to find either Ariados or VS Seeker for something. Oh, we see an N, so he needs to dig for the laser. Oh, he already has laser, that's fine. So we see probably an N coming down now. Another reason to keep the Shaman, so that we have good outs from something like an N. One of the good things about this deck, as you've just seen, is we only have 17 left in deck, so a lot of good outs still in there. We see our opponent now optable to find Ariados, so he's going to have constant poisons, or constantly threatening poisoning, but once we overcome this Sceptile, our opponent has no energy on the board, so we should be able to win this game fairly easily. So we'll go into Vespi because it has free retreat. And it's time for a quick Pokemon count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we actually have the knockout with Vespiquen. Let me just confirm this. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 16, 17 with the added bonus. So let's put Life Dew onto the active. It means we don't even need to dig here. I'm just going to play out my hand. I think I'll use the Unknown at least. But I don't even want to put Shaman down because, oh, Combee's a good pickup. Oh man, it does mean we're weak to Hex. But I don't want to give... You know what, we're so far ahead in prize race at this point. The Shaman's fine to play. We may as well just have the hand. We again will play down Unknown here. Just want to limit any option of a dead draw in our deck at this point. And we've picked up the evolutions that we need for next turn. We didn't pick up any energy, which is kind of a shame here. So I might just go for a compressor. We do have VS Seeker to pick up something like a Blacksmith next turn. So we do still have energy options. So we will just go for the Be Revenge here. And because I compressed extra Pokemon away and used those unknowns, we've easily knocked out this Sceptile, and our opponent is forced to scoop simply because he had no more attackers and we had plenty lined up. And that's the whole point in this deck, guys. We did have quite an easy matchup, I will admit, but the ladder has been kind of temperamental today. It's been the servers have been going off and on, so I don't want to do another battle just in case it cuts out on me again. But you saw there, any sort of EX deck is going to struggle. We were getting one-shots quite early on thanks to weakness. We, of course, do have 3 types that we're trying to cover here that are covering the main threats in the format right now. Stuff like Keldeo and Seismitoad. Stuff like Yveltal. These are probably the top 3 right now. And then the non-EX decks are easy to kill anyway, just because of the amount of Pokemon we play. Also, we can sometimes run into Sceptiles and get pretty lucky there, and get nice vengeances going pretty early as well. So this deck can take on pretty much everything, thanks to just being a non-EX fast trader. Very close in relationship to something like a Night March deck, but it has slightly more HP and slightly more options against things like Giratina. So I feel like it's very slightly the superior deck right now, and that is proving itself to be true with current results. So hope you enjoyed this, guys, and that quick little battle as well. So let me know what you think about this deck below, and it's been Joe from Omnipoke, and I will see you guys next time.